They said grief was the storm, but for Ethan Carter, it was a skyscraper. Cold, hollow, and echoing with a silence that could crush a man long before the fall. The Columbia Center in downtown Seattle stood like a dark pillar against the drizzle-smeared sky, its glass skin reflecting the gray weight of winter. On the 73rd floor, where the penthouse walls touched the clouds, Ethan Carter sat in a leather armchair that felt more like a throne in a deserted kingdom than a piece of furniture in a home. Across from him, his daughter Emma occupied the corner of a couch far too big for her small frame. She hadn't spoken in 6 months, 212 days, since her mother's heart stopped beating in the cardiac ICU at Harborview Medical Center. The silence had become its own kind of presence, drifting through the penthouse like a phantom, settling in the gaps between their breathing. It was not the kind of silence you could break with chatter. Ethan had tried. Sports games, piano lessons, therapy appointments, the latest toys, even weekend trips to the San Juan Islands. Each attempt fell into the same void. Emma's hazel eyes would track movement, but her mouth remained still. Now her fingers traced invisible shapes on the surface of her tablet screen. Loops, circles, squiggles. She wasn't drawing. Not really. It was more like she was keeping her hands busy so her mind wouldn't wander to the place where pain lived. The penthouse itself had become an icebox, not in temperature but in spirit. The once warm, golden-lit rooms where his wife, Grace, used to fill the air with laughter now felt sterile, like a hospital corridor after visiting hours. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed a city that looked alive, lights winking on in offices and apartments, ferries gliding across Puget Sound. But inside, life was suspended. Ethan stared at the calendar on his phone. It was stacked with meetings, board reviews, investor lunches, strategy calls with partners in New York. The machinery of his business empire hummed along without pause, even as his own heartbeat felt slow and mechanical. But today, he pressed cancel on everything. If the markets took a hit, so be it. If shareholders panicked, they could stew in their boardrooms. He had a daughter who was slipping further into the shadows each day, and if he didn't pull her back now, there might come a time when she wouldn't want to return at all. He stood and walked over to her. "Emma," he said softly, crouching to meet her eyes. She glanced at him, then back to her tablet. He exhaled and chose his next words carefully. "Let's go for a walk, somewhere your mom loved." She froze, and for a second he thought she'd refuse. Then, without a word, she set the tablet down. 10 minutes later, they were in the private elevator descending from the 73rd floor to the ground. Outside, the rain had eased to a fine mist, and the air smelled of wet pavement and distant ocean salt. Ethan took her hand, expecting her to pull away, but she didn't. They walked south along 4th Avenue, past the monorail track and the open-mouthed entrance of the Westlake Center. The streets glistened under street lamps, puddles reflecting the neon of late-night diners. The wind carried the faint aroma of roasting coffee from a corner shop, mingling with the scent of fresh bread from a bakery still open on Pine Street. Ethan smiled faintly. "Your mom used to say a person needs to smell something baking to remember they're alive." Emma didn't answer, but he caught the slightest flicker in her gaze, like a shadow shifting. He tightened his hold on her small hand. They turned onto Pike Street, heading toward the beating heart of the city, Pike Place Market. Even this late, the market wasn't fully asleep. A fishmonger hosed down his stall, the water rushing into the gutter. Across the cobblestones, a flower vendor rearranged leftover bouquets, their damp petals glowing under the market lights. But as they approached the crowd that gathered near a street musician playing a cello, Emma's fingers clenched around his. Her breathing quickened. She tried to pivot back the way they'd come. "It's okay," Ethan murmured, but she shook her head, eyes wide. The press of strangers, the unpredictability of movement, it was too much. He could feel her trembling through her hand. He knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. "I'm right here. We're not turning back." Her lips pressed together, and for a moment he thought she might cry. But she didn't. She simply squeezed his hand tighter. He stood, and together they pushed through the small crowd until the music faded behind them and the air opened up again. Ethan didn't have a destination beyond this game. He just knew they couldn't keep returning to the 73rd floor, not yet. That was when he saw it. A narrow storefront tucked between a bookstore and a florist, its windows glowing with golden light. Above the door, in soft script, the sign read, "Harbor Light Cafe." Warmth spilled from the glass like an invitation, and inside he caught a glimpse of someone moving behind the counter, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a braid, her hands moving in quick, graceful shapes in the air as she spoke to a man at the register. Ethan glanced down at Emma. Her eyes had locked onto the woman's hands, tracking each movement as though the shapes carried a language only she understood. "Want to check it out?" he asked. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. That was answer enough. He pushed the door open, and the bell above it chimed. The air inside was thick with the scent of cinnamon and espresso. Wooden shelves lined with jars of coffee beans and herbal teas hugged the walls. A fire crackled in the small brick hearth in the corner, giving the whole place the feeling of a living room rather than a business. The woman behind the counter turned toward them. Her eyes, warm brown, lit from within, landed first on Emma. She smiled, then lifted her hands and signed a single word. "Hello." Emma's breath caught. Her fingers twitched, uncertain, then slowly she formed the same shape back. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not grief this time, but the first pulse of something unfamiliar in months. Hope. The bell above the door sang again as it settled back into place, its chime fading into the hum of soft jazz playing from a corner speaker. Inside the Harbor Light Cafe, time seemed to slow, as if the world outside, the drizzle, the restless streets, the press of strangers, were sealed off by the thick wooden door behind them. Ethan guided Emma toward the counter, his eyes scanning the small, warmly lit room. The walls were the color of honey, their texture uneven in the way that comes from years of paint over brick. Local watercolor paintings of the Seattle waterfront hung between shelves of books, cookbooks, poetry, children's stories, free for customers to borrow. At the center of it all stood the woman they had seen through the window. She wore a dark green apron embroidered with the cafe's name in pale gold thread. Her braid draped over one shoulder, a few stray strands escaping to frame her face. She smiled again, this time adding a small wave, then signed once more. "Hello. Welcome." Ethan returned the greeting aloud. "Hi. We were just walking by and—" He hesitated, glancing at Emma. She stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the woman's hands. The woman's smile deepened, and she signed something slower this time, clearly and deliberately. "My name is Bella. What's yours?" Emma didn't answer. Ethan felt a familiar ache stir. But before he could speak for her, Bella's expression softened, and she signed again, slower still. "It's okay. You can tell me later." She then turned to Ethan, her voice calm but touched with the faintly rounded enunciation of someone who spoke less often than they signed. "Would you like to sit by the fire? I can bring you something warm." "That sounds perfect," Ethan said, feeling a quiet gratitude for the way she hadn't pressed Emma. They settled into a small table near the hearth, its surface worn smooth by years of coffee cups and conversation. Emma slid into her chair, still watching Bella as she moved behind the counter. Her hands never stilled. They punctuated every spoken word with movement, whether she was speaking to a co-worker, giving an order to the barista, or answering a question from the man at the register. When Bella returned, she carried 2 mugs on a wooden tray, one steaming with rich hot chocolate crowned by a cloud of whipped cream, the other filled with a dark roast coffee that smelled like warmth itself. "I guessed," she said as she set the mugs down. "But I think I guessed right." "You did," Ethan replied, taking a sip. The coffee was smooth, the kind that lingered without bitterness. Bella crouched slightly to meet Emma's eye line. She signed a simple phrase, "This is for you." Then, with the spoon, she tapped the whipped cream, signing sweet. Emma's fingers twitched again, hesitant, then shaped the sign for "thank you." Awkward, but clear enough. Something flickered in Bella's eyes. She nodded, signing back, "You're welcome." Ethan felt that same pulse of hope from the night before. This was different. Emma wasn't just imitating, she was engaging. Over the next half hour, Bella drifted between customers, but each time she passed their table, she added a new sign: chocolate, fire, friend, never overwhelming, never demanding. Emma followed each one carefully, sometimes attempting the gesture in return, sometimes simply watching. When the cafe's crowd thinned, Bella returned with 2 small paper pamphlets. She placed one in front of Ethan and one in front of Emma. The cover read, "Silent Hands, a free community program for deaf and hard-of-hearing children." Ethan looked up. "This is yours?" Bella nodded. "I started it 2 years ago. We hold free sign language classes for kids at the Seattle Public Library every Saturday. Most of the time, it's for children who are deaf or hard of hearing, but lately, we've had siblings, parents, even neighbors join. Communication works both ways." She turned to Emma, signing, "Would you like to come?" Emma didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Ethan glanced at his daughter. "We could try it, just to see." Bella smiled, not pushing for more. "Saturday at 10. You don't have to sign up, just show up." As they left the cafe later that evening, the rain had eased into a gentle mist. The air outside felt different somehow, less heavy, less closed in. Emma held the pamphlet in her hand the entire walk back to the car, her fingers tracing the raised ink of the title. For the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, the high walls around his daughter's silence had a door, and Bella might know where the key was hidden. Saturday mornings in Seattle had a certain softness to them, fog curling over Elliott Bay, gulls wheeling above the market roofs, and the city's usual rush muted under a blanket of gray. Ethan had grown used to working through those mornings, measuring time not by the light in the sky, but by the glow of screens in a boardroom. This one was different. By 9:30, he and Emma were parked outside the Seattle Public Library's Central Branch, the glass and steel geometry of the building reflecting the shifting clouds. Ethan glanced at the clock, then at his daughter in the passenger seat. She was holding the Silent Hands pamphlet again, edges now softened from being folded and unfolded all week. "You ready?" he asked gently. Emma didn't speak, but when he opened the car door, she followed, her small sneakers tapping softly against the wet pavement. Inside, the library smelled faintly of paper and rain-soaked coats. They followed the signs to a bright glass-walled community room on the 4th floor. Through the windows, Ethan could see a semicircle of small chairs, a whiteboard with colorful drawings, and Bella arranging baskets of flashcards on a low table. She looked up as they entered, her braid swinging over one shoulder, and smiled. She signed, "Good morning," before speaking it aloud. Emma's eyes flickered in recognition. Her hands hesitated, then mirrored the movement, not perfect, but recognizable. "That's wonderful," Bella said warmly. The class was small, 4 other children, 2 of them wearing hearing aids, 1 with a cochlear implant, and 1 boy about Emma's age who was there with his older sister. Parents sat in the back, some quietly watching, others joining in. Ethan took a seat along the wall, content to observe. The lesson began with simple greetings, then moved into a game Bella called Sign and Find. She would hold up a card, a drawing of an object or action, and the children would race to sign it correctly. For apple, Bella tapped her knuckle against her cheek. For book, she mimed opening pages. For friend, she hooked her 2 index fingers together. Emma started slow, her hands tentative. But by the 3rd round, something shifted. She leaned forward, eyes bright, and signed fire without prompting when the card appeared. The boy next to her grinned and signed it back. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He had forgotten what her face looked like when lit from within. Halfway through, Bella introduced a short role-playing exercise, what she called modeling. 2 children would pretend to be in a cafe, one ordering, the other serving. Emma volunteered without being asked. Ethan blinked at the sight. 6 months of silence, and now here she was, miming a mug of hot chocolate, signing please and thank you with a shy smile. Bella caught Ethan's eye as Emma returned to her seat. There was a glimmer of something there. Pride, certainly, but also understanding. She had seen children come back from the edge before. When class ended, Bella handed Emma a small set of laminated flashcards bound with a metal ring. "These are yours," she said. "Practice a little every day, but no pressure. Learning should feel like play." On the walk back to the car, Emma flipped through the cards, pausing at each illustration to sign it quietly to herself. Over the next month, the library became their Saturday ritual. It started with the class, then sometimes spilled into hot chocolate at Harbor Light Cafe or a stroll through the market if Emma was feeling brave. Ethan noticed the changes slowly at first, how she would sign a word at home without prompting, how she lingered in the cafe to watch Bella's hands. Then came the smiles, the occasional giggle, the way she started to sign to him before bed. "Good night, Dad. I love you." He began to think less about the markets he wasn't monitoring and more about the moments he didn't want to miss. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Ethan sat at his desk in the Columbia Center, reviewing an engineering report on a new medical device his company was developing. His phone buzzed. Andrew Collins, one of the company's largest shareholders. Ethan answered, leaning back in his chair. "Andrew, I'll be blunt," Collins said. "The market's sliding. Our competitors are positioning aggressively, and you've been absent. The board's starting to notice." "I'm still making decisions," Ethan replied evenly. "Not in the room you're not. You've canceled the last 3 strategy sessions. We've got investors questioning whether you're distracted by personal matters." Ethan's jaw tightened. "My daughter is more important than the stock price right now." There was a pause on the other end. "You've never let sentiment get in the way of business before. Just remember, you start losing the board's confidence. You won't be in that chair much longer." The call ended, but the words lingered. Once, the idea of losing control over his company would have lit a fire in him. Now he found himself glancing at the clock, calculating how long until he could leave to pick Emma up from her after-school art class. That Saturday, during the last 10 minutes of silent hands, Bella handed out storybooks in both English and ASL. She sat beside Emma, pointing to each illustration, signing the corresponding word, then letting Emma repeat it. Ethan watched them from the back, a quiet weight settling over him. This wasn't just therapy, it was connection. It was healing disguised as play. After class, while Emma lingered to show another child her flashcards, Ethan approached Bella. "I've been meaning to say thank you for what you're doing for her." Bella shook her head. "She's the one doing the work. I'm just giving her tools." "You're giving her more than that," he said quietly. For a moment, Bella held his gaze. Then she smiled and signed, "Thank you," before saying it aloud. That evening, after Emma went to bed, Ethan sat alone in the dim light of the living room. The city sprawled out beyond the windows, lights shimmering on the black water of the Sound. His phone buzzed again, an email from Collins, marked urgent. He ignored it. Instead, he reached for the deck of flashcards Bella had given Emma and turned them over one by one, tracing the pictures with his thumb. The signs felt awkward when he tried them, his movements clumsy, but he kept at it, picturing the way Bella's hands moved, fluid, precise, full of meaning. Maybe, he thought, this was how you rebuilt a life, not in boardrooms or stock charts, but in small, patient gestures that said, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. The January rain was relentless, washing the streets of Seattle in silver and shadow. Ethan had begun to think of these gray days as a kind of camouflage, an excuse for the city to keep its head down, for people to move quickly from doorway to doorway without looking too closely at anyone else. Inside Harbor Light Cafe, however, the world was warm. The air smelled of espresso and cinnamon, and the fire in the hearth popped softly, casting a gentle glow across the room. Ethan sat at a corner table, laptop open but idle. Emma was across the room with Bella, practicing fingerspelling at the counter. They were laughing, Emma's silent but wide-mouthed, Bella's low and warm, punctuated by graceful signs. It was the laughter that made Ethan look away from his screen and simply watch. There had been a time, not long ago, when he thought he'd never hear or see that sound again from his daughter. Now it was happening in a place he'd stumbled into by accident, with a woman who seemed to understand Emma in ways even he couldn't. Still, there was something about Bella he couldn't quite name. A carefulness behind her smile, a way her gaze occasionally drifted past you, as though tracking something invisible. When the cafe had emptied for the afternoon lull, Ethan wandered to the counter. Bella was wiping down the espresso machine, her braid falling forward over her shoulder. "You two are having fun," he said. Bella looked up, smiling. "She's getting better. Today she spelled her name without looking at the chart." "She seems lighter," Ethan admitted. "I'm not sure I've seen her this way since—" He stopped himself, swallowing the rest. Bella set the cloth down. "Kids carry things, even when they don't talk about them, even when you think they're fine. Sometimes all they need is a way to put it somewhere else." Ethan nodded. "I've been meaning to ask, how did you get into this? The classes, the cafe?" For a moment she hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the rain-streaked window. "I wasn't always here. I applied for a scholarship to the University of Washington, special education program. I wanted to teach kids like me, deaf, hard of hearing. I made it through every round until the final interview." She paused, and there was a subtle tightening in her jaw. "They told me I was impressive, that my grades were perfect. But then one of the panelists asked if I'd be able to communicate effectively in a classroom. I explained about sign, lip reading, interpreters. He smiled, polite, cold, and said, 'We just don't think parents will accept a teacher who can't hear their child.'" Ethan felt a slow burn in his chest. "That's legal? Probably. Fair? Not even close." Bella gave a small shrug, but her eyes stayed on the window. "I worked 3 jobs for a while, saved enough to open this place. And if I couldn't teach in a school, I'd teach here. The cafe pays the bills. The classes are free." Ethan leaned on the counter, searching her face. "You didn't let them stop you." "I did for a while," she admitted. "But then a boy came in here, 8 years old, hearing aids, hiding behind his mom. He thought sign language was embarrassing. I taught him his name. The next week, he brought a friend. I realized I didn't need their permission to do what I wanted to do." Before Ethan could respond, the bell above the door chimed. A man in a damp jacket entered, shaking rain from his hair. He ordered quickly, barely glancing at Bella. As she made his drink, the man glanced up, frowned, and said loudly, "Hey, I asked for skim milk, not whole." Bella tilted her head, reading his lips, then signed, "One moment," reaching for a fresh cup. The man snorted. "What? You don't understand English?" Ethan was on his feet before he realized it. "She understood you just fine," he said, his voice calm but edged. "And she's remaking it, like you asked." The man muttered something under his breath but took the new cup without further complaint. When he left, Bella exhaled, shoulders relaxing. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You don't need to apologize for him," Ethan replied. "I've seen enough boardrooms to recognize ignorance when it opens its mouth." Bella gave a small, almost tired smile. "You get used to it. Doesn't mean you stop noticing." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone in the living room of the Columbia Center penthouse. The rain tapped against the glass like fingertips on a drum. He thought about the way Bella had stood there, taking the man's condescension without flinching. He thought about the scholarship she'd been denied, and the way she had built something anyway. Emma's voice, small but clear, drifted back to him from earlier that day. Why are good people treated badly? He didn't have an answer. Not one simple enough for an 8-year-old, not one satisfying enough for himself. In the business world, he'd learned early that merit didn't always win, and fairness was a currency most people refused to trade. But seeing it here, in this warm cafe, in the life of someone who had given his daughter a path back to herself, it hit differently. He poured himself a glass of water and walked to the window. The city lights glittered like scattered coins, reflecting off the dark waters of Elliott Bay. Somewhere down there, Bella was probably closing the cafe, stacking chairs, counting the till. And tomorrow, she'd show up again, smiling, teaching, holding space for anyone who walked through her door. Ethan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about the quiet wars people fought without an audience, the battles that never made headlines. And for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to fight a war that had nothing to do with profit margins. The morning broke cold but bright, the kind of Seattle winter day when the sun showed its face just long enough to make the frost glitter before hiding behind the clouds again. Ethan had promised Emma an outing, and today's destination was the Sunday Ballard Farmers Market, a tradition he hadn't revisited since Grace was alive. It wasn't just nostalgia. He had a purpose. For weeks, an idea had been forming in the back of his mind, a project that could merge his company's medical tech with something more human. He'd been researching organic produce suppliers, particularly ones who could tailor nutrient profiles for patients recovering from illness. Ballard, with its stalls of fresh vegetables, handmade goods, and community spirit, was the place to start. Emma was already in her coat and boots by the time he called her. She looked expectant, curious. When Bella arrived to join them, green scarf wrapped snugly around her neck, Emma's face lit up in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten. "You've been here before?" Bella asked as they walked toward the rows of white-tented stalls. "Not in years," Ethan replied. "Grace used to love it. She said food here tasted different because it came with someone's name attached." Bella smiled at that. She was right. The market was alive with color and sound. Baskets of winter squash in deep oranges and greens, glass jars of honey catching the light, bunches of carrots still dusted with earth. A man strummed a guitar near the entrance, his voice warm against the cool air. Children wove between adults, clutching paper cups of hot cider. Ethan led them toward a vendor selling organic microgreens. He spoke with the farmer about nutrient density, harvesting schedules, and shipping logistics. Bella hung back with Emma, pointing out the difference between baby kale and mustard greens, fingers dancing in easy signs that Ethan had begun to understand without translation. When the conversation with the farmer ended, Ethan rejoined them. Thinking of adding this to your menu? Bella teased. Maybe, he said, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested more. Halfway down the main row, the clouds gave way to an unexpected burst of rain, sharp and cold, pelting the canvas overhead. Vendors scrambled to pull plastic covers over their displays. Ethan quickly steered them toward a covered seating area near a food stall. They huddled under the awning, steam rising from their breath. Bella wrapped her scarf tighter and glanced at Emma, who was happily munching on a warm pretzel from a nearby baker. "You okay?" Ethan asked her quietly. She hesitated, eyes on the rain-slick pavement. "I'm fine," she said finally, though her voice was softer than usual. For a moment, Ethan thought that was all she'd share. But then Bella's gaze lifted, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her scarf. "I was engaged once," she said, voice low enough that the market's bustle muffled it from anyone else. Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he stayed silent, letting her continue. "We were together for 4 years. He said he didn't care that I couldn't hear, said he loved my independence. But when the tests came back and I found out I couldn't have children..." She exhaled, slow and shaky. "He walked away within a month, told me he wanted a whole family, like I was less than." The rain drummed harder on the awning. Ethan felt something tighten deep in his chest, an anger not directed at her ex, but at the world that taught people to measure worth in such cruel, narrow ways. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Bella gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "I told myself I didn't care, that it was better to know before marriage. But the truth is, since then, I've avoided anything that felt serious. Because no matter how much someone says it doesn't matter, there's always that moment when it does." Her eyes flicked toward Emma, who was dipping the last of her pretzel in mustard. "That's why I try to keep a little distance. For her sake, too." Ethan followed her gaze. "She's not afraid of you," he said softly. "And neither am I." Bella's lips parted as if to answer, but a gust of wind rattled the awning and the moment shifted. When the rain eased, they walked the rest of the market, buying fresh bread, jars of jam, and a bag of the microgreens Ethan had eyed earlier. Emma insisted on carrying the bread, holding it close like a treasure. On the way back to the car, Ethan found himself thinking less about logistics and more about the woman walking beside him, the one who had given his daughter back her voice in ways no therapist had managed. He wanted to tell her his idea for Harbor Light 2.0, but he knew it wasn't the right moment yet. Later that night, after dropping Bella at the cafe and tucking Emma into bed, Ethan sat at his desk with the city lights sprawled out beyond the window. He opened a notebook, not the kind filled with corporate budgets or projections, but a blank one, the kind Grace used for ideas. He began to sketch out a plan, a space that combined the warmth of a cafe with the functionality of a therapy center, classrooms for ASL, corners for reading, nutrition workshops in partnership with local farmers. At the top of the page, he wrote one sentence: "Healing isn't just about medicine. It's about everything that feeds a life." As he set the pen down, he realized he wasn't just thinking about the people this place could help. He was thinking about Bella. And maybe, just maybe, about himself, too. The following Friday, Seattle was awash in the soft blue haze of a winter dusk. Office towers shimmered in the fading light, the ferries on Elliott Bay moving like quiet, patient giants across the water. Ethan left the Columbia Center earlier than usual, a decision that would have startled his assistants had he bothered to tell them. He wasn't going home. Instead, he parked on a quiet street in Belltown and walked the last block to Harbor Light Cafe. Through the window, he saw Bella moving between tables, her hands and smile in constant motion. The sight stirred something in him, not just admiration, but an urgency he hadn't felt in years. Tonight, he wasn't there for coffee. He was there with an idea. The bell chimed as he entered, the warm scent of cinnamon and espresso wrapping around him like a welcome. "Ethan," Bella said, coming toward him with a smile. "I wasn't expecting you this late." "I was hoping we could talk," he said, "about something important." Her brow lifted in curiosity, but she nodded toward a corner booth. "Give me 5 minutes." Ethan waited, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he barely touched. The cafe had quieted, just a couple finishing their desserts, a man reading by the fire. Bella slid into the seat across from him, setting her notepad aside. "What's on your mind?" she asked. He hesitated only a moment before leaning forward. "I want to help you expand this place, not just another cafe, Harbor Light 2.0, a space that combines what you're already doing with more. ASL classrooms, therapy rooms, nutrition programs, partnerships with local farmers, a real community hub for kids with hearing loss, developmental delays, or trauma." Bella blinked, clearly caught off guard. "That's big." "I know," he said, "and I can fund it. We could find a building, central, accessible, staff it with the best people. You wouldn't have to worry about rent, overhead, any of it." She sat back, arms folding lightly. Not defensive, but measured. "Why?" "Because what you're doing matters," Ethan replied without hesitation. "I've watched my daughter change in ways I didn't think possible. I've watched you give her tools to climb out of the silence she was drowning in. I want other families to have that chance." Her gaze softened, but stayed cautious. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing," he said. Then, after a beat, "Just to see it happen." Bella shook her head slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting in something between disbelief and appreciation. "Ethan, I've had people offer to help before. Usually it comes with strings or pity. I don't want to be someone's charity project." "This isn't pity," he said firmly. "And it's not charity. It's an investment into something that's worth more than profit." Her eyes searched his face, as if looking for cracks. "You really believe that?" "I do," he said, "but I can't make you believe it. That's up to you." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced toward the counter where Emma was sitting on a stool, drawing a picture of a cat. "I need to think about it," Bella said finally. Ethan nodded, though a small knot of disappointment formed in his stomach. "Take all the time you need." 2 days later, the decision was taken out of both their hands, at least temporarily. Ethan was at home, making breakfast with Emma, when his phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Carter Technologies' CEO spotted in Cozy meeting with local cafe owner. Romance or business? Below it was a grainy photo of him and Bella at the corner booth, his head bent toward hers in what the headline writer clearly wanted to imply was intimate. By noon, 3 more articles had appeared, each speculating about the mystery woman in the life of Seattle's most private CEO. The calls started soon after. Andrew Collins' voice came through first, tight and impatient. "Ethan, you've seen the coverage." "I have," Ethan said evenly. "This is bad optics. Investors are jittery enough with your recent absences. Now they think you're distracted by some barista?" "She's not a barista," Ethan said, his tone sharpening. "She's an educator, an advocate, and she's making more of a difference than half the people in our industry." "That's not the point," Collins shot back. "The board is concerned. If this relationship, whatever it is, becomes a scandal, it could tank confidence. We need you to end it before it gets messy." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "You're asking me to choose between the company and someone who's helping my daughter heal." "I'm asking you to remember your responsibilities," Collins said coldly. "To the shareholders. To the brand." When the call ended, Ethan stood for a long moment, staring out at the skyline. Once, he might have caved, done the practical thing to keep the machine running smoothly. But not this time. That afternoon, he drove to Harbor Light. Bella was wiping down tables when he walked in, her expression shadowed. "I saw the articles," she said before he could speak. "People have been asking questions all morning. Customers, vendors, my landlord." "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "I didn't expect it to blow up like this." She gave a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I did. This is why I keep my life simple. Why I don't take big offers. I've seen how quickly things can get complicated." He stepped closer. "I don't care what they say. I'm not walking away from this, or from you, because a few people in suits are nervous." Bella's eyes softened, but her shoulders stayed tense. "It's not just about you. If this keeps getting attention, it could hurt the cafe. The classes. These families don't need cameras in their faces." Ethan exhaled, the weight of her words settling over him. She wasn't just worried about herself. She was protecting her community. That night, as he put Emma to bed, she looked up at him and signed, "Bella, stay with us," before speaking aloud. "I want her to stay forever." The innocence of it made his throat tighten. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "We'll see what we can do," he whispered. Lying awake later, Ethan realized something. Bella's caution wasn't fear, it was strength. She had built her life carefully, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even him, topple it without reason. If he wanted her to believe in Harbor Light 2.0, he'd have to prove it wasn't about ego or headlines or even gratitude. He'd have to show her that it could belong to her and to the people she served completely. And he knew exactly where to start. The air in Capitol Hill carried that late winter bite that made people walk faster, but Ethan Carter wasn't in any rush. He was standing outside a red brick townhouse, a bouquet of white tulips in one hand and Emma's mittened fingers in the other. Beside him, Bella adjusted the knot of her scarf, looking far more composed than he felt. "Ready?" he asked her quietly. She smiled faintly. "I should be asking you that." "I'm not the one about to walk into my mother's house with whatever this is." Ethan exhaled. "It's family. Or, I hope it will be." The door opened to reveal Margaret Carter, tall, silver-haired, her sharp features softened only slightly by age. Her gaze went first to Ethan, then to Emma, and finally to Bella. For a moment, her expression was unreadable. "You're late," she said, though her tone wasn't entirely unkind. Ethan kissed her cheek, handing her the tulips. "Traffic." Margaret's eyes lingered on Bella. "And this is Bella Martinez," Ethan said. "She's the reason Emma's speaking again." Margaret studied Bella for a long moment, then extended her hand. "Welcome." The evening unfolded in the careful rhythm of first meetings, polite questions, cautious laughter. Bella answered Margaret's inquiries with warmth, but never overstepped, sharing just enough about the cafe and the Silent Hands program to paint a picture without turning the dinner into a resume recital. Emma stayed close to Bella, signing quietly to her between bites of roasted chicken. Margaret noticed, her gaze softening almost imperceptibly. At one point, while clearing plates, Margaret leaned toward Ethan in the kitchen. "She's different," she said. "In a good way?" Ethan asked. "In a way that makes you look lighter," Margaret replied. "That hasn't been true in a long time." 2 days later, it was Ethan and Emma's turn to enter someone else's world. Bella had invited them to Tacoma to meet her extended family, a lively, multi-generational household in a modest blue craftsman home. The moment they stepped inside, the air was filled with the aroma of simmering pozole and the sound of overlapping conversations in both English and Spanish. "This is my brother Miguel," Bella said, introducing a tall man with kind eyes. "And his wife Teresa. And these are my nieces and nephews. There are more, but they're outside building a snow fort." Ethan shook hands, made small talk, accepted a steaming bowl of pozole. Emma found herself surrounded by children who included her in their games without hesitation. Bella's mother, petite and sharp-eyed, pulled Ethan aside after dinner. "You look at my daughter like she's the only person in the room," she said in accented English. "Don't let that change." "I don't intend to," Ethan replied, and meant it. By the end of the weekend, it felt as if some invisible threshold had been crossed. They weren't just two people orbiting each other's lives. They were starting to share the same center, which made what happened next all the more jarring. On Monday afternoon, Harbor Light Cafe was bustling with customers when a man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped inside. His presence shifted the air, purposeful, controlled. Ethan recognized him immediately. Robert Lang, one of the more aggressive members of Carter Technologies' board. Lang scanned the room until his gaze landed on Ethan and Bella at the counter. His smile was polite, but his eyes were cold. "Ethan," he said, striding forward. "Mind if we have a word?" Ethan straightened, already bracing himself. "We can talk here." Lang's glance slid to Bella. "I'd rather speak privately." "She's part of this," Ethan said evenly. Lang's mouth tightened. "Fine. Then I'll be direct. The board isn't happy. Investors are whispering about your attachment here. They're questioning whether your priorities are aligned with the company's interests. If this continues, we'll have no choice but to push for a leadership change." Bella stiffened beside him. Ethan met Lang's gaze without flinching. "You're threatening to remove me because I care about something other than quarterly reports?" Lang's smile returned, thin and calculated. "I'm reminding you that in our world, perception is reality, and right now the perception is inconvenient." He slid a business card onto the counter. "Think about it. You've built an empire. Don't burn it down over sentiment." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and left, the bell above the door jangling in his wake. For a long moment, the cafe's sounds seemed distant. Murmurs, clinking cups, the hiss of the espresso machine. Bella turned to Ethan, her brow furrowed. "You don't have to put yourself through this," she said quietly. "I'm not letting them dictate my life," Ethan replied. "Not anymore." Her gaze searched his face. "Even if it costs you your company?" "Yes," he said, the answer coming without hesitation. "Because if I give in, I lose more than a company. I lose the person I'm becoming." Bella didn't respond right away, but the way her hand brushed against his on the counter told him she understood. That night, after closing, Bella found Ethan still sitting at a corner table, Emma curled up asleep beside him. "You know," Bella said softly, "I've spent a long time keeping my life small, safe. But maybe it's time to see what happens if I don't." Ethan looked up at her, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that Harbor Light 2.0 wasn't just a possibility. It was something they might build together. The opening day of Harbor Light 2.0 dawned crisp and bright, the kind of rare Seattle winter morning when the sky was a flawless stretch of pale blue. The renovated building stood at the corner of Pine and 8th, its large windows gleaming, the gold lettering above the entrance catching the sunlight. Harbor Light Cafe and Learning Center. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the faint sweetness of baked goods cooling in the kitchen. Tables were arranged to encourage conversation, and along the back wall, a small stage was set up for community storytelling and music. The ASL classrooms on the second floor had bright murals, soft lighting, and shelves lined with picture books in both English and American Sign Language. Ethan stood near the entrance, watching as guests streamed in. Neighbors, local reporters, community leaders, and families from Bella's classes. Emma flitted between them with a small tray of cookies, her shyness tempered by the fact that she could sign "thank you" to each person who took one. Bella moved through the crowd like sunlight, her green dress swaying as she greeted people in a blend of voice and sign. Every few minutes she met Ethan's gaze across the room, and in those brief exchanges, they shared the quiet knowledge that they had made this happen together. By noon, the place was full. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was set to begin at 1. Ethan was about to step outside to speak with a local TV crew when the first hint of trouble came, not in sight or sound, but in smell. A faint, acrid tang in the air, sharp enough to cut through the aroma of espresso. He frowned, scanning the room. Bella caught his expression and crossed over. "What is it?" She signed and spoke at the same time. "Do you smell that?" She sniffed, then nodded slowly. "Burning." Before they could investigate further, a man burst through the front door, one of the vendors from the neighboring building. His face was pale. "Fire next door!" he shouted. "Top floor! It's spreading! Fast!" In an instant, the warm hum of the cafe turned into a ripple of alarm. Parents pulled children close. Conversations turned into sharp questions. Ethan felt the shift in the air. Panic has a way of multiplying when no one knows what to do. Bella didn't hesitate. She stepped up onto the small stage, lifted both arms high, and began signing with deliberate, powerful clarity. "Everyone, stay calm. We need to leave the building now." Her voice followed the signs, steady and firm. "There's a fire in the building next door. We are evacuating. Please move toward the front doors in an orderly way." Some in the crowd immediately obeyed, but Ethan noticed a young boy near the back, no older than 7, frozen in place. He wore hearing aids and had his hands clamped over his ears, eyes wide with fear. Bella spotted him at the same moment. She moved quickly through the crowd, crouching in front of him and signing directly, "It's okay. You're safe. We're going outside together." The boy's breathing slowed just enough for her to take his hand. Ethan was already moving to open a clear path, guiding them toward the front doors. Outside, the street was filling with people. Smoke curled from the top-floor windows of the neighboring building, dark against the winter sky. The wail of sirens grew louder, and moments later, 2 fire trucks rounded the corner. Bella scanned the crowd instinctively, checking that all her students and their families were accounted for. But when she turned, her face went suddenly still. "Where's Maya?" she asked, signing at the same time. Ethan followed her gaze to a young mother standing on the curb, panic etched across her features. "She was in the upstairs reading nook," the woman said, voice breaking. "I thought she was right behind me." Before Ethan could stop her, Bella was already running toward the building. The fire hadn't breached the cafe yet, but smoke was drifting in through the second-floor windows. Bella took the stairs 2 at a time, her heart pounding. She found Maya, a small girl with dark curls, huddled beneath a table, clutching a book to her chest. Bella crouched, coughing lightly from the smoke, and signed, "We have to go now." Maya shook her head, eyes wet. Bella switched to the sign for safe, tapping her chest twice, then reached out her hand. "Come with me," she said gently, her voice soft but urgent. The girl hesitated, then placed her small hand in Bella's. Together they navigated back to the stairs. Ethan was waiting at the bottom, relief flooding his features as they emerged. He scooped Maya into his arms and carried her outside, Bella close behind. By the time the fire crews had contained the blaze, it was clear that Harbor Light 2.0 had been spared any serious damage. The neighboring building, however, was not so lucky. Smoke still rose in pale ribbons from its blackened upper windows. Local reporters, who had originally come for the opening, now had a new headline. Cameras turned toward Bella as parents and children gathered around her, thanking her, hugging her. Ethan stood to the side, watching as she knelt to sign with a group of children, reassuring them that the danger was over. Her calm had been the anchor in the chaos. One reporter stepped forward. "Ms. Martinez, you were seen going back inside to help a child who was trapped. Can you tell us what happened?" Bella glanced at Ethan, who gave her a nod. She signed and spoke together. "I did what anyone would do. I saw a child who needed help. That's what Harbor Light is about, making sure no one is left behind." The footage of her rescue aired on every local news station that evening. The phrase, "Silent Hero of Seattle," appeared in headlines and hashtags. Messages poured in, from parents, teachers, disability advocates, and strangers moved by what they'd seen. Even the more hard-edged members of the Carter Technologies Board could not ignore the wave of public admiration. Robert Lang called Ethan the next morning, his tone notably less confrontational. "Good optics," he said bluntly. "The community loves her. That could be useful." Ethan cut him off. "She's not useful. She's essential. And she's not a brand to be managed. She's a person who's doing more good than this company has in a decade." Lang didn't argue. That night, after the crowds had thinned and the building had been cleared for reopening, Ethan and Bella stood together in the quiet cafe. Emma was asleep in the corner, wrapped in a blanket. "You saved her life," Ethan said softly. Bella shook her head. "I just couldn't stand the thought of her being alone in there." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's who you are, and I'm not going to let anyone, not the board, not the press, twist that into something smaller." For once, she didn't deflect with humor or change the subject. Instead, she reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "Then maybe," she said, "this is worth the risk after all." The week after the fire felt like a blur of news clips, thank you notes, and donations arriving for the families displaced from the neighboring building. Harbor Light 2.0 had become more than a cafe and learning center. It was a symbol. Ethan knew there was no better time to make his next move. The morning of the reopening, the winter sun was uncharacteristically warm, streaming through the tall windows and glinting off the gold lettering of the cafe's sign. The crowd was even larger than before. Neighbors, volunteers, journalists, local officials, and the families who had filled the place with life from the start. Emma was wearing a pale yellow dress, her hair pulled into a neat braid. She was buzzing between tables, offering slices of carrot cake to anyone who smiled at her. Ethan watched her for a moment before glancing toward the corner where Bella stood, her green dress catching the light, speaking in both voice and sign to a group of parents. He felt the weight of the small black box in his pocket and the certainty in his chest that this, here, now, was where the question had to be asked. When the speeches began, Ethan stepped up to the small stage. Bella was seated in the front row beside Emma, who was swinging her legs and holding her mother figure's hand. "First," Ethan began, "I want to thank everyone who believed in this place. Bella started it in a single room with a coffee machine, a handful of tables, and a vision that communication is a right, not a privilege. Today, it's a home for anyone who needs a voice or a hand to be heard." Applause rippled through the room, but Ethan raised a hand for silence. "Bella," he said, looking straight at her, "you've changed more than my daughter's life. You've changed mine. You've taught me that healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about building something stronger in its place." He stepped down from the stage, moving toward her. The crowd instinctively shifted, forming a circle around them. Ethan dropped to one knee. Gasps and murmurs rolled through the room. From his pocket, he drew the small velvet box and opened it. Inside lay a simple but elegant ring, a platinum band with a single diamond flanked by two smaller stones, one for each of the three people he hoped would be a family. But before speaking, he lifted his hands. In deliberate, steady movements, he signed, "Will you marry me?" Bella's eyes widened, a tremor passing through her as the signs landed. The cafe was utterly silent, save for the faint hum of the espresso machine. Ethan followed with the words aloud. "Will you marry me, Bella? Not because you saved my daughter, not because you built this place, but because I love you, and I can't imagine the rest of my life without you in it." Emma's eyes were bright as she squeezed Bella's hand. Then, for the first time in months, she spoke loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "Say yes, Bella." Bella's gaze flickered between Ethan and Emma. Her lips trembled into a smile and her hands began to move. "Yes. Yes, I will." The room erupted in applause, some clapping, others signing the motion for applause with raised, twisting hands. Bella reached down and Ethan slid the ring onto her finger. She pulled him up into an embrace, whispering against his ear, "I don't just love you, I love our family." The moment didn't end there. Ethan turned toward the crowd, still holding Bella's hand. "And one more thing. Today isn't just about us. It's about making it official that Emma will have the family she deserves." A murmur rippled through the room. Bella's eyes widened again, this time in surprise. Ethan crouched beside Emma, taking her small hand. "Emma, how would you feel if Bella became your mom? Forever?" Emma's smile was shy but sure. She looked up at Bella, then signed and said aloud, "Yes." Bella knelt beside her, tears pooling in her eyes. "Then yes," she whispered, wrapping her arms around Emma. Reporters captured every second. Photos of Bella's tear-streaked smile, Emma's small hands signing yes, and Ethan's expression of unguarded joy. By the end of the day, the story had traveled beyond Seattle, picked up by national outlets as the proposal in hands. But for Ethan, Bella, and Emma, the significance wasn't in the headlines. It was in the promise they had made, not just to love one another, but to stand as a family no matter what storms might come. That night, after the cafe was closed and the last guest had gone, they sat together at one of the corner tables. Emma was curled up with her head in Bella's lap, half asleep. "You know," Bella murmured, stroking Emma's hair, "I didn't think I'd ever say yes to something like this again." Ethan took her free hand, tracing the ring on her finger. "And I didn't think I'd ever have a reason to ask." Outside, the city glowed softly under the winter night, but inside, the warmth was complete. Three people who had found each other against the odds and who were ready to build something unshakable together. Spring arrived in Seattle slowly, like a shy guest unsure if it was welcome. One day the rain would soften to a mist, and the cherry blossoms would bloom along the streets of Capitol Hill. The next, the wind off Elliott Bay would sweep the petals away in flurries. But on the morning of Ethan and Bella's wedding, the city seemed to conspire in kindness. The air was crisp but gentle, the sky a pale watercolor blue, and Volunteer Park Conservatory stood like a glass jewel amid gardens just beginning to stretch toward the sun. Inside the Victorian greenhouse, rows of orchids, ferns, and spring flowers formed a living aisle. The fragrance of fresh blooms mixed with the faint earthy scent of soil, wrapping the space in something intimate and alive. Friends, family, and community members filled the seats, Margaret Carter in the front row, Bella's mother and siblings just opposite. Near the center sat children from silent hands with their parents, some signing to one another, others speaking, a living embodiment of what this day represented. Emma stood between Ethan and Bella as the officiant welcomed everyone. She wore a soft white dress with a pale blue sash, her hair braided with tiny blossoms. When she smiled up at Bella, there was no trace of the quiet, withdrawn child who had once lived behind a wall of silence. The ceremony began in 2 languages, spoken English and American Sign Language, each phrase mirrored by the other. The officiant's hands moved as smoothly as his voice carried, a rhythm that felt like music even in silence. Ethan went first with his vows. He signed each sentence before speaking it aloud, looking directly into Bella's eyes. "You taught me that love is not measured in words, but in presence. You brought my daughter back to me, and in doing so, you brought me back to myself. I promise to spend the rest of my life building a world with you, one where every voice is heard, every hand is held, and every heart is welcome." Bella's eyes shimmered as she began her own vows, signing and speaking in unison. "You saw me, not as someone to be fixed, not as someone to be pitied, but as someone whole. You opened your home and your heart, not just to me, but to the community I love. I promise to stand with you, to listen when the world is loud, and to speak when the world is silent. Together, we will raise Emma in a home where language is love, and love has no barriers." Emma squeezed both their hands. Then, with a grin, she signed and said aloud, "I promise to help too." Laughter rippled through the guests, mingled with a few tears. When the rings were exchanged, they each signed the word forever before sliding the bands onto the other's finger. The officiant declared them husband and wife in both languages, and the room erupted, applause ringing from some hands, silent waves of joy in the air from others. Ethan and Bella kissed, their hands still clasped in the sign for "I love you." The celebration spilled out into the gardens, where tables were set under a canopy of blooming magnolias. The food was a blend of Bella's heritage and Ethan's favorites: pozole simmering in a great earthen pot, fresh bread from Pike Place Market, salads bright with the microgreens from Ballard Farmers Market. Emma darted from table to table with her friends, showing them the family sign she had created, a combination of the signs for love and home. Every guest tried it, smiling at the simplicity and power of the gesture. Margaret Carter found a moment to stand beside Bella. "You've given my son something I didn't think he'd find again," she said quietly. "And you've given Emma a mother who sees her completely." Bella clasped Margaret's hand, the warmth between them wordless but sure. Later in the afternoon, speeches began. Miguel, Bella's brother, took the microphone. "In our family," he said, "we have a saying, La familia no siempre es de sangre. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who walk into your life when you need them most. Ethan, you walked into Bella's life. Bella, you walked into Emma's. And now you've all walked into ours." When it was Ethan's turn, he spoke less as a CEO and more as a man humbled by love. "I used to think success was about building towers," he said, glancing at the skyline in the distance. "Now I know it's about building tables and making sure there's always one more chair." As evening approached, golden light streamed through the glass of the conservatory. The last part of the day's ceremony was one Ethan and Bella had planned quietly: the legal adoption of Emma. A judge, one of Bella's regular customers, stood before them, document in hand. "By the authority vested in me by the state of Washington," she said, "I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Bella Martinez, you are now the legal mother of Emma Carter." Bella knelt to hug Emma, tears slipping down her cheeks. Emma signed Mom and whispered, "I love you." In the weeks that followed, Harbor Light 2.0 grew busier than ever. The cafe became the largest bilingual community hub in Seattle, offering free ASL classes 3 nights a week, support groups for parents, and nutrition workshops in partnership with local farms. Ethan returned to Carter Technologies, but with a different agenda: He created a new division focused on accessibility, funding assistive technologies for people with disabilities. Shareholders who once questioned his priorities now praised his vision. But the real victories were smaller. Evenings when Emma sat between them at the kitchen table, practicing her reading in both English and ASL. Saturday mornings when the three of them walked hand in hand through Pike Place Market, stopping to greet friends who signed their hellos. Quiet nights when Bella read aloud, while Ethan traced the signs alongside her, learning with Emma. One rainy night, months after the wedding, the three of them were closing the cafe. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and outside the rain tapped a steady rhythm on the windows. Bella flipped the closed sign, then turned to Ethan and Emma. "You know," she said, "people keep telling me this place has changed lives." "It has," Ethan said. Bella smiled. "It's changed mine the most." Emma slipped her hands into both of theirs and signed the family sign she'd made that day in the garden. They signed it back, 3 sets of hands moving in perfect sync. For a moment, it didn't matter what storms had come before or what storms might come again. They had built something strong enough to stand, together. Because love, they knew now, was the only language that needed no translation. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment of this journey. From a cold, high-rise penthouse to a warm cafe filled with laughter. From hesitant hands learning their first signs to the unbreakable embrace of family. Ethan, Bella, and Emma's story reminds us that love, patience, and trust can bridge any distance. If your heart feels just a little warmer after hearing this story, that's the greatest gift we could ever hope to give. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so we can meet again in the next story, where love, kindness, and hope will always be our shared language. You are a part of this family. Thank you so much.